everybody, and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarajane and I am an Enneagram teacher, a writer, a podcaster, and now I'm a YouTuber. I'm so excited to be here, and today we get to talk about one of my very favorite topics. It's the main thing I talk about in my life. For those of you who aren't familiar, I wrote a book called The Honest Enneagram. I run an account called Enneagram Coffee and a podcast called Enneagram Coffee as well. So this takes up a significant portion of my life, and so I'm so excited that I get to share it with you here. So I thought it would be fun for the first video that we do on the Enneagram series is to really just introduce you to what the Enneagram is. So the Enneagram is essentially a map of human psyche. I like that phrasing specifically because it's talking about what we're looking at, where we're going. It's not really talking about how we're gonna get there, because the Enneagram isn't necessarily your self-growth tool, it's your self-growth information. It's the directions about where you could go. So you could compare this to something like DISC, Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs, astrology, if you will. The big difference here is that those things are telling you what you do, where the Enneagram is telling you why you're doing it, what you're trying to achieve by showing up this way. I like to think of it as the information that tells us what we think we have to be in order to be a good person, in order to be loved, in order to belong, in order to succeed, all of those good things that we all want as people. We've learned distinct and unique ways in which we earn those things. And the Enneagram breaks that down into 9 distinct types. So you're gonna put the Enneagram graphic right here so you can follow along as I walk you through the system. So there are 9 distinct types. Each type has a basic fear, basic motivation, and essentially a whole worldview that tells them what they need to be in order to be loved, accepted, liked, okay, belong, all those good things. So that is your core type. The important thing to know about your core type is that it never changes. There's a million theories about why or how that started. Some people say you're born your type. Some say there's a childhood wound. There's this whole theory we can do another video about called the soul child theory, which I'm a really big fan of. And that has a whole other distinct origin source of your type. Either way, the important thing to know is that your type never changes. That dominant type, that's the one you're working with most of your life. Now you're gonna notice on either side of your core type, there are 2 other numbers. These are what we call your wings. Your wings can only be those 2 numbers on either side of your core type. The work here is really in balancing those wings out. You'll start to notice as you learn the system that actually those wings have a lot of good stuff for your dominant type to pull from. So an example of this being our 9 is our peacemaker. They are the type that's focused on making everyone feel comfortable, safe, welcome. They don't really overshare. They're more inclined to silence themselves and their opinions in favor of other people feeling comfortable, but they're surrounded by 2 of the more dominant numbers, the types that have really strong personal convictions and aren't afraid to share them or to express them to other people, so they can really pull that in and round out their dominant type. So it's the same for all of us with our wings. We can really pull those in. Now, the important thing to know here is that most of us lean into one or the other. So it's just like that movie 50 First Dates where that guy's like working out one arm and his one really strong arm and one arm that's not been worked out at all. It's like that with our wings. Usually we're leaning to one or the other, but the work is really balancing them out, making sure you're exercising both of them so that they can support you in your dominant type. The second element we're going to talk about is subtypes. So subtypes are essentially what we think we need to be in order to survive. It's like our survival mechanisms. It's what humans for generations have done to survive. There's 3 distinct ways: sexual or one-to-one, social, and self-preservation. One-to-one is like intense one-to-one connection. Social is creating a strong social network. Self-preservation is taking care of yourself, getting your needs met, surrounding yourself with a close family community, being physically safe, those kind of things. We all have all 3 subtypes, but we usually have one that's dominant, one that's secondary, and another that is repressed. So there's a little bit of a stacking there that can really impact the way your type shows up. So this is why you may see someone with a dominant type 7 and another person with a dominant type 7 and they look very, very different. That's because maybe they have a different dominant wing and a different dominant subtype. that can flavor the way the type shows up. The other important thing to know about subtypes is that for each instinct, for each core type, has one instinct, one subtype that is the counter type. What this means is that in motivation, they are completely that core type, but they might look different in behavior. I like to think of this as like a push-pull, and so the counter types are typically people who have the impulse to be the dominant type, but then constantly question that. So an example of this is I'm a social 7, and so while I'm motivated by 7 motivators, my behavior can look very different. It can look more like a 2 or a 1. So when you're trying to figure out your type, that might be something to keep in mind. And as you're doing your work, if you're a counter type, you're gonna have to do some of the work of the other numbers. So as a 7, I still have to do some of the 1 work, some of the 2 work, and that really can help me to more round out my growth journey. And you might find a counter type 6 who needs to do a lot of the work of an 8 would do. And so when you're a counter type, you really need to pull in the information from all of the types that you are impacted by. You really need to pull in the information of the types that you can look like as well. Okay, the third element we're going to talk about are the lines. If you look at the diagram, you can notice there are 2 lines moving from and to your number. These are your stress and rest lines. So what this means is there's one number that you move to in stress. So you can start to look like that type whenever you're stressed out, whenever you need a little bit of self-care. It's also sometimes what we think we should be showing up like, and therefore it can be pretty stressful. So if a 7 tries to live out of that one state, they're going to be a little bit stressed out. It's going to be harder for them. Then we move to the rest number, and that rest number is what we look like when we're safe, when we feel relaxed, when we're at ease. Or it can be an intentional infusion of self-care. We can pull character traits, activities, ways of being that type might do into our life so that we can be a little bit more calm, relaxed, at ease ourselves. Now, it's important to know that you can go to the high side of either of those numbers, or you can hit the low side of either of those numbers. So just because it's a stress move doesn't mean there's not some benefit there. And just because it's a rest move doesn't mean there's not some elements that don't serve you either. In my first Enneagram training, they like to say you can climb up that line or you can slide down that line. It doesn't really matter. But the way that I like to work with it is I like to think, well, what's the high side of this number that I can intentionally infuse? And then how can I use the low side of these numbers as an indicator that something's not quite working for me right now? So that's our system overview that kind of tells you a little bit about how the system works. But there's kind of 3 major questions that I get when I'm talking about the Enneagram, and I want to go ahead and address those now. The first one is, how do I determine my type? What's the best test to take? And here's the truth. I really don't encourage you to take a test. I believe it is so much easier and less confusing for you to read through the numbers and see for yourself which one resonates. So you can do that at websites like EnneagramInstitute.com, or you can buy my book, The Honest Enneagram, and it will break it down for you as well. Read the description of the type, see which one resonates, and maybe you can narrow it down to 1 right away, or maybe you need to narrow it down to like 2 or 3 from there. Now, once you get it narrowed down to the top 2 or 3, you can look at a few different elements. You can ask yourself if there's a connecting point. Is there a counter type here that maybe makes one look like the other? So let's talk again about 7 and 2. If you type as a 7 and you see a lot of 2 in you as well, maybe you could be a counter type 7 or a counter type 2. Other things to keep in mind is, are these numbers connected in any way? If you have a dominant type and then you're related to a type that's next to it, could one of those be your wing? The other thing to keep in mind is, are those lines, are they connected by the lines? If you are a type 9 and you relate really well to type 3, maybe it's because you have that line. And you can start to notice, are there connections, and which one feels dominant and which one feels like it just comes up when I'm stressed out. So those are some things to keep in mind as well. Don't be afraid for this to be a long process. A lot of times you read your type and you know it's you because it feels like someone read your journal. Other people, it just takes a little bit longer. And so don't worry about that. Don't worry about rushing that process, because there's so much growth to be done in the work, in the discovery process. So once you're in the discovery, you're in the work. So keep going. That's okay, because either way, you're figuring things out about yourself, and that's what matters. The second question that I get really often is, now that I know my type, what do I do with it? And that's where I think it's important that we distinguish the Enneagram as a map and not a tool, right? Because we need the tools to support the growth. So that's why in my book, I break it down, like I have a method written out called the Honest Method. I talk through kind of step by step how I think you should approach the Enneagram, and I give you some of my favorite tools to pair with your Enneagram type. And you don't need to read my book in order to do that. You just need to know what are the elements of work that I need to do as my type, and then what are some tools out there that I can bring in? Is it meditation? Is it mindfulness work? Is it going to be presence practice? What do I need to do in order to get from here to here and where I want to go? The third question that I get often is, well, how do I know that I've done the work? How do I know that I'm doing it right? And there's two answers for that for me. The first one is the main objective of the Enneagram is to first recognize that this thing you thought you had to be your whole life, right? You thought you had to be this personality type, this descriptor of this number. So you thought you had to achieve, you thought you had to be helpful, you thought you had to be perfect, you thought you had to be happy. All of these things you thought you had to be in order to be good, happy, loved, accepted, all of the good things we want out of life, you thought you had to be this certain thing to get it. And the work is unlearning that, recognizing that you are innately worthy of love, innately good, and accepting the fact that you're already gonna be there. You're already enough, and so you don't have to earn it. When we get into this work, we start to recognize that these are our coping mechanisms. These are the things that we learned we had to be in order to survive, in order to be okay. And a lot of the work is in recognizing that, like, we're all right. We're gonna be okay. And we don't have to perform or show up in a specific light or live according to a certain code in order for life to be okay. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, this is something that you're going to participate in for the rest of your life. And I think you're worth it. I think you're worth that curiosity. I think you're worth the compassion. I think you're worth the understanding. And if you think about it from this perspective, that every relationship in your life is simply a byproduct of the relationship that you have to yourself, I think it becomes blaringly obvious that you should do this work, that you can create a loving, kind, honest, connected relationship to who you are, both your strengths and your blind spots and the areas that serve you and the areas that don't, so that you can have healthier, long-lasting, better relationships in the long run where you do less harm to yourself and to others. So hopefully this gives you a really good overview of the Enneagram, of the system itself, and a little bit of direction into where to start. There's so many more videos like this coming your way. There's videos going to be on each distinct type, different elements of the Enneagram, going a little bit deeper into those, and so much more. So thank you guys so much for being here. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, because that apparently helps me out here, and let me know if you have any content requests in the comments below. See you next time.